All right, y'all. Welcome back to Conscious and Aligned Conversation. I am Chidimma, and I'm joined with someone that I've wanted to have on my podcast, actually, and now he is hanging out on his couch, and I'm hanging out here, and we are going to just have a conversation. This is Marlen Whitley. So welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me. I'm glad to be here.
Absolutely. So Marlen is married to this woman that I've known for a really long time, and we are all older than we look. And so she is a dear girlfriend from a long time, and I actually got to hang out with them in Cabo a couple years ago for their wedding. So Marlen, why don't you tell everyone that is watching, listening, who you are in your own words?
Sure. Hi, everyone. My name is Marlen Whitley. I am a husband, father, brother, friend. In my mind, I think of myself as an activist of some sort. Certainly, like to think of myself as a thinker and someone who strives to raise the consciousness of people, particularly those who may not share my particular perspective or point of view. By way of background, I am an attorney. I'm a graduate of the University of Texas at Austin, where undergrad I served as the president of the student body. I was the third African-American elected to serve in that capacity. And from there, I went on to attend the University of Texas Law School. And I've been practicing law for close to 20 years now.
Dang, 20 years. I love it. So congratulations on holding that role, being the first Black person to do it. And I was remarking as we were kind of getting the logistics, in the pre-call, I love your t-shirt, hashtag melanin. Got to keep it real, right?
Yeah.
So you have mentioned a lot of layerings in terms of your social identities and in terms of kind of how you show up in the world in terms of roles and such. Now, one of the reasons I wanted to talk to you is I kind of spotted, once we became friends because of Julia, your wife, who is one of my dear friends, like I mentioned, I was privy to, as we are in terms of social media, we start to get to know folks through their posts, through what they choose to share about themselves personally, professionally even. And so I would notice some of the things that you were talking about. And as I would be talking with Julia or FaceTiming, I'm like, I need to talk to Marlen because he has, I think what's really interesting about you is that you have a unique perspective, a very balanced, I would say, objective perspective. And yet the thing that I want to talk about most right now is the experience that you had recently. I think it was last week where someone was literally trespassing in your home. And so I just want to have you, if you can share with us a little bit of context to that experience, and we'll kind of go from there.
Sure. So I mentioned before that I'm a father. I'm the father of four wonderful kids. I've got a baby girl who just turned 1, and I have 3 outstanding young sons, ages 17, soon to be 14, and soon to be 10. And so, having grown up with my father and having, the relationship I had with him, where he taught me a lot about not only, how to, live in this world and come into my own and be an adult, but also provided, me warnings on survival in this world, understanding the realities of the world we live in. May not always see me through the same lens that, my family and my community saw me. And that was tough to handle at an early age. And, I was, given lectures and conversations that I didn't yet have the wisdom or experience to really fully understand or appreciate. And now, sadly, in some respects, I find myself having these same conversations with my own son about how to survive. And of course, in this climate and political climate and environment in particular, I think the lessons that my father taught me that I'm sharing with my own sons are particularly even more salient now than maybe perhaps when I was their age. only because the kind of the en masse incidents, if you will, of young Black men and boys unarmed, being shot in the streets, whether by law enforcement or by do-gooder neighborhood watchmen purporting to be looking out for their neighborhood. Or in the most recent incident, the case of a young man, Ahmaud Arbery, who was murdered in cold blood in broad daylight in a neighborhood, unarmed, but pursued and hunted down like prey. And so all of these incidents for me have really crystallized the importance of sharing with my own children, my sons in particular, just lessons on how to be aware of, not only self-aware, but aware of others and aware of your environment, and to work like hell to not put yourself into positions. And certainly I don't mean to blame them for being at any particular place or time, but to certainly just be aware and conscious of where certain surroundings and how those things could potentially play out. And more recently, I had an incident where we were enjoying a quiet evening at home, and my middle son looked out to the yard. The window overlooks the front yard, and said, "Dad, there's a lady out front." I caught me off guard, and my wife. We weren't expecting any visitors or any packages, and so he stood there and watched for a couple minutes. I went downstairs and opened the door, and to my surprise, there was a lady there who happened to be watching her toddler daughter, who was walking near our front doorstep and playing near the flower bed. So I of course caught her off guard and introduced myself, or she introduced herself and introduced her daughter and said her daughter had happened to wander into the yard because the gate was open. And so from there, I made small talk. I introduced the boys. They came down to kind of inspect. My wife came down and introduced. We exchanged pleasantries, and I thought that was it. And fast forward to the following week, where my sons and I were coming back from the park that we typically go to in this COVID, stay-at-home order environment. And so we were there to get some fresh air and exercise. And upon arriving back, and there was parking along the curb, my sons and I watched the same lady open the very gate that was open. And I gave it a benefit of the doubt the first time, and just excused that as a curious toddler. But this time we actually watched this lady open our gate and usher her young daughter into our yard and started walking around. And we got out of the car, and I was clearly visibly upset. I know my sons could sense it, and I have a sense she had it too. She's not been back. I've not seen her walking over the last couple of weeks. But in any event, I was pretty hot. I just mustered out a hello, and I'm going upstairs to get my son's dinner. But I immediately sat them down and explained to them why I was so upset, and almost immediately they got it. I mean, I explained to them like how the optics of it. How can you imagine what would have happened if it were me, opening the gate into neighbor's yard or anyone's yard, just unsuspecting and walking, inviting myself in and trespassing, even with the innocence of a young toddler accompanying me. I couldn't imagine even doing that because I know the consequences. But it was really a crystallized lesson for my sons on white privilege and the privilege that we talk about and speak to them about all the time. Oftentimes I spend so much time explaining to them why they can't do certain things that some of their friends do. And sadly, this was one of those examples that really drove home the point of why, we can't, I shouldn't say can or shouldn't do certain things. And it's sad. It's not that we're doing anything wrong, but the appearance of it alone for us can be costly and sometimes even dead.
That's right.
And so I explained that to my sons, and not being satisfied, I had to kind of vent and get it out. And really, it was more so a release for me, but I really wanted other folks to understand, and particularly those who are not Black or those who may not fully appreciate what we mean by double standards and privilege, to really grasp hold of this and really take to heart the message I was trying to convey. Like, the innocence that this young mother saw in her child, you know, for Black parents, we're not often afforded to give our kids that same sense of innocence. It's taken away from them far too early because we spend too much time counseling them on how to behave and how to act and how to dress, so that they may not meet with incidents like, you know, Ahmaud Arbery and Tamir Rice and Trayvon Martin and countless others.
Right. Absolutely. So thank you so much for sharing that. And I really am sorry that that was your experience. I can't say that I'm surprised, sadly, right? And a couple of things that I really want to highlight and underscore for those that are listening or watching this. One of the things that you said, Marlon, is that you spend a lot of time, as your father spent a lot of time with you, helping your sons survive. Meaning, so if you are listening and you identify with us in terms of the layerings of our race, ethnicity, for example, as parents, as folks that love little people, have little people in your lives, you can certainly relate to wanting these folks to, you know, these little people that are under our watchful eye, to that we love, right? And we've sown into.
Right.
You want them to go out, experience life, and return home to us alive, right?
Absolutely.
That is not what Ahmaud Arbery's mom experienced. In fact, Sunday was the first Mother's Day she didn't have her son, right? And that's something that we felt acutely within the Black community because it's just so painful. Parents should not be left behind. They shouldn't lose their kids, period. Under no color, right? We don't want that. That said, we are experiencing as Black folks more than other groups of people because of the systemic racism, institutional and structural racism, and white supremacy and white privilege that exists. And so how much time does it take, or what is the cost to your sons even, never mind to you, Marlon, with having them focus on survival rather than thriving?
You know, it's sad, quite honestly. The cost really is the cost of you know, childhood experiences and just youthfulness that their counterparts are able to enjoy without consequence. You know, I hate the idea of my boys having to go through a checklist and think so methodically about with how loud their music is. You know, these, I mean, they're kids and they have enough to think about, and in a sense, it's robbing them of a chance to just be free and explore, just like this young lady's toddler was doing, just wandering into a yard, as innocent as that. You know, there's footage of Ahmaud Arbery, you know, when he was in the neighborhood, walking through, looking at a house that was being constructed, and those who are in support of those who gunned him down are using that as a pretext to suggest that he was trespassing or looking or doing something nefarious. When the reality is, how many of us have been on walks or runs where we see something being constructed and our natural curiosity gets a hold of us and we check it out? I mean, that's the idea that our presence alone is menacing or invite some air of suspicion is really problematic. And what's unfortunate is we saddle, particularly our young Black boys, with all of that baggage on their shoulders before they're even old enough to fully appreciate the why. You know, my son, particularly my oldest, doesn't understand why I'm so leery of, you know, where he hangs out and who he hangs out with. And I have to remind him, it's not that I don't trust him. I don't trust the environment and the world that I'm sending him out into. Because in as much as I can control his actions, I can't control the thoughts and beliefs and actions of those who think like those who gunned down Mr. Arbery.
Yep, that's right. And so it's, you know, you mentioned innocence and this white woman's audacity. So I call it the audacity of the caucasity, or caucasity of the audacity, right? To let herself into your home, your space, your sanctuary, you know, the sanctuary of, and it's not just you, it's your daughter, your 3 sons, your wife, right? It's your family, so that her child could roam So not only does her child have the child's home, right? She now has your home to be a part of the space, you know, and that's trespassing if we look at the law just flat out. I know that there's nuance in that even. And yet, if we were to switch, you know, so looking at, many of you know that are listening, I am a social science researcher, so I don't speak about things without data to support it. I have the receipts, and you do too, because Google is your friend. And so you can look up the data that supports what I'm going to say. So what I'm going to say is that Black children, looking at the gender binary, bearing in mind that gender is a spectrum, looking at Black boys, Black girls, they are suspended and expelled at higher frequencies, more frequently than other kids from different race ethnicities, certainly compared to white students, their counterparts that are white. So when we're looking at the loss, right, and the theft of life, as in the case of the names that we've mentioned, you know, we have a hashtag and we're tired of this hashtag, say her name, say his name, say their name, right? Because we have experienced so much loss for just living while Black. So any number of things, we're fortunate if the police are the only thing called, and there's no violence attached to that. And yet, just the nature of calling the police on someone for not doing a crime is violent. So I want everyone to get on board with that. The other thing that you mentioned, Marlen, and I was thinking about, and I shared it on my page, and I don't know how many folks shared your words. It is kind of bordering on viral. I know that the last time I checked, 600 plus, about 628 folks had a reaction to it. And that's pretty significant for someone who's not a celebrity, you know, in addition to multiple shares, right? Because the words were so poignant and we could feel there was a visceral reaction to just the injustice of it, as well as the violation, right? It's like how I felt when I was, my place was burglarized when I lived in Vegas, and the person or people who did it climbed through the kitchen window, and I want to believe that they're youth, because adults wouldn't fit in that small of a space. They broke the window and they rifled through things. They stole jewelry. And it's just a violation of, like, this is my space. You are in my space and you have not been invited. And perhaps if you had not, like, if this woman wanted to cultivate a relationship with you and Julia, right? That might have been a different story, but that is not what was happening, right? She just wanted to have more space, you know, like invite herself in. And so when we think about white supremacy, it does look like hoods, right? It does look like white hoods and burning crosses in front of homes and terrorizing folks, like domestic terrorism, firebombing churches, really causing harm and death and chaos and confusion within the Black community. And it also looks like what this white woman who's 5'3" did by letting herself into your space. Because one of the things you said, Marlen, it was, imagine if the roles were reversed. Imagine if, because you're 6'4"?
6'4".
Okay, 6'4", 270 pounds maybe.
Oh, no, 240.
240. I thought it was 240. And you're Black, right?
Right.
Imagine if you took your young child to her home and let yourself in.
Absolutely.
You know, and she's 5'3", white woman. So if we were going to reverse, you know, similar to folks that are storming capitals, armed, so
yes.
gun-toting, Confederate flag waving.
Fully armed.
Fully armed. And listen, before anyone ats me, right? I have no problem with the Second Amendment. So I'm not even going to entertain that. That's not what we're talking about. We
Absolutely.
are talking about folks that have no consideration for anyone else but themselves. And if the situation was reversed, So that's what I want us to focus on.
Sure.
If the situation was reversed, so say it was Marlon and his fraternity brothers, and they're armed, storming the Capitol, would they live to tell about it? Or would folks be in the comments talking about, well, what did they think was going to happen? They deserved it. Why was he running? I don't know. He was jogging. Why was he selling rolled cigarettes? I don't know, because folks sell rolled cigarettes. And when you don't have any money, and this is a job that's at least a useful job, someone wants rolled cigarettes. Why was he walking with Skittles in his hands? I don't know, because young people wear hoodies and they walk around with Skittles in their hands. So the problem, when we go back to what Marlen's saying as a father, who when he sends his young boys out, his sons out, he wants them to return. And I want, as their aunt, I want them to return too, right? Okay. We run into problems when we are not able to look at this clearly. And when the focus is on what Marlen did wrong or what Ahmad did wrong, when that's not actually what we need to be focused on. So as a parent, as a man, as a, what are some things that you want folks to really hear that perhaps they hadn't considered before?
As I shared, in my story, I want my kids and their Blackness to have the same presumption of innocence as this lady and her child. But more importantly, I want my kids to feel that they have the presumption of innocence. I don't want to saddle them with the guilt or the concern of behaving and looking at a checklist for survival. Quite honestly, you mentioned white supremacy and its many faces, and you were spot on. I think what's probably more problematic for me is the mentality that is so quick to criminalize, particularly young Black men who meet, unfortunately, with violence or death at the hands of police or citizens. The presumption being that they must have done something to warrant the reaction that ended in their either assault or their death. It happened with Michael Brown. It happened with Eric Garner. It happened with Tamir Rice, who was just playing in the park. It's happening right now with Ahmaud Arbery. And so often we see attempts made to criminalize the behavior or even bring and dredge up past behavior.
That's right.
In order to rationalize behavior of white people who other white people do not want to criticize or condemn. And I can only wonder if it's because they themselves are guilty of that same kind of rationalization, or it's just the currency of whiteness is so valuable they don't want they traded it and they don't want to jeopardize the political capital that comes along with that. And so, for me, it's really problematic that the first instance is to demonize or criminalize the people who are actually victimized by this supremacist type ideology, beliefs, and behavior.
Yep, that's right. And it's interesting that you were talking about, the criminal justice system, the legal system, et cetera, and the criminalization. I mean, it's no different. So when we look at the war on drugs, some of you do not know what that means. I know what that means. Marlen, do you know what that means? Okay, so the war on drugs happened, and again, Google is your friend. The war on drugs happened in the, I would say, 60s, 70s more, 70s, 80s, right, in terms of criminalization of drug addiction. So now we know, we have evolved, right, as a society, and so we now know that alcoholism, addiction, substance use disorder, as it's actually known as, or alcohol use disorder, is a disease state. Not dissimilar from diabetes or lupus, right? And so we don't blame someone who has lupus or has been diagnosed with lupus or diabetes. We may talk smack if they're a family member and it's like, lay off the sugar, et cetera, right? That said, overwhelmingly, we wouldn't blame someone who was diagnosed with cancer. we would ask them, how can we come alongside you? How can I be helpful to you? And that is what we're doing now with opioid addiction. Now it's a public health crisis, same addiction. That said, the survivors of it, right, or the victims of it, Black and brown folks, were criminalized compared to white people and white soccer moms, not dissimilar from the woman who was trespassing in your yard. Maybe her and, you know, her sisterin, right, may be addicted to opioids. And so now our shift is to treatment and support and provided resources, when we should have been doing that all along, right? The other thing, in the class I taught last semester, I was working with mostly first year students, and we're talking about the response, reaction, how this current administration has been dealing with COVID-19. And they were asked to write a policy memo. And so one of the options that they thought about was to implement social distancing measures legally. And so one of the things, as their educator, I had an opportunity, you know, we need to think about unintended consequences. And so as I was looking at a reference point, something that I wanted to talk to you about, I remembered that I had saved an article that was written by the New York Times that I haven't gotten a chance to look at, but the title was enough: Scrutiny of Social Distance Policing as 35 of 40 Arrested Are Black. So police that are masked on horses are enforcing social distancing laws, right, or executive orders. And interestingly enough, I'm not surprised. There were 40 citations issued, and 35 of them went to Black folks.
Yep.
When I'm fairly confident that the population of wherever they were is not represented in that, 35 out of 40, what is that? I don't have, math is not necessarily my thing, except for.
It's a high percentage.
It really is. Okay, 88%, 87.5%. There is nowhere besides the continent where the percentage of Black folks is 87.5%.
Right.
And it reminds me of like broken windows and stop and frisk, right? What were you going to add?
Yeah. No, it's, and that really underscores the point about the criminalization of the behavior of Black people or those in Black communities. It's, I cannot ever fully understand the rationalization of looking to Black and brown people or looking at them through a sphere of suspicion or suspected criminality. I mean, many of us, the vast majority, are working people just like everybody else. At the end of the day, all we endeavor to do is to make a decent living and take care of our families, enjoy our friends, enjoy our lives. Sadly, we have to give more thought about how to go about doing that, only because we have far too many instances where we wind up, becoming statistics and represent a disproportionate number of those who are criminalized or arrested or cited for behavior that quite honestly runs rampant throughout all communities. And so, the statistics that you cited aren't too surprising. I'm very familiar with the article that you're referencing. But I really think that it underscores a point. It's really, in the sad part about it to me is, in as much as the COVID-19 disease has already crippled and disproportionately affected Black communities, we now find that those who are on the receiving end of punishment are those who are Black and brown and come from same communities that are dying at higher rates. There was an incident here in Texas not too long ago, in Dallas to be specific, where a business owner violated the order of the Texas governor and opened a salon and became an overnight celebrity, drawing the support of not only the lieutenant governor and a city senator, but also the governor himself, who backtracked and walked back the very order that he signed that she violated.
Yep.
She was the recipient of an effort of I think they raised over
$500,000, 60
for her GoFundMe. Notwithstanding the fact that it was reported, I think today, that she had already received her stimulus funds for her business. But to me, the larger point is, in the same state, there were two Hispanic ladies who were arrested for violating that same order, but there was not a clear end call for supported action on their behalf. And when I engaged in dialogue to call out this double standard, the rationalization began again. What these ladies did was different. Or this lady in Dallas, she was taking a stand. She was making a political statement. Well, I want to remind you that there was also a young man named Colin Kaepernick who decided to make a political statement and use his platform in order to bring consciousness to what he thought was injustice. And these very people who were championing this salon owner in Dallas vilified Colin Kaepernick and called him everything but a child of God for the stance he took. Nonviolent, and it was respectful, after having consulted with a young man who played football at my alma mater, University of Texas, and happened to be a veteran, and shared with him that the manner of taking a knee being a much more respectful protest. And so, these types of dichotomies and these instances need to be brought to the forefront so that people can fully understand and realize the double standard that the playbook that they're running from, and the double standards that they're willing to live by and justify. And it infuriates me to no end when I see these types of instances where a white person is championed for doing the same things that Black people and brown people are vilified for.
That's right. Well, the double standard, right? I mean, and Colin actually harmed no one.
None.
I mean, in fact, stupid people, so I call them willfully ignorant, actively racist, actively stupid people, were cutting the Nike swoosh off of socks that they were wearing, that were burning their shoes that they were wearing, right? Like, I mean, come on. And I agree with you. I mean, that woman, $500,060 was in the GoFundMe page. It's now disabled, which made me think about, let me look up the other GoFundMe page that is foolish, which is the one for the wall. That's not going to be built. And that's up to 25.5 million. So if people tell me we can't actually afford it. Oh no, y'all rally. These folks rallied around this woman who's being proclaimed and paraded around like a hero. I'm sorry, she is not. Especially when she's defying orders, and the Black judge that was only doing his job is now receiving death threats.
Yep.
I'm sorry, nothing he did warrants death threats, period. I mean, also looking at the New York Times article, right? 35 out of 40. So we now know the math is 87.5%.
Mm-hmm.
Where were those police officers at the Capitol buildings that these folks are storming, who are not practicing social distancing? They are not wearing masks. I've seen police officers throw Black folks around like they're rag dolls for not wearing masks, for not socially distancing, like being violent towards them, right? And people will say, well, they didn't follow the rules. Okay, let's take a look at this. And then people there, in that instance of people, I mean, in my state, we are being hard hit. 48% of folks that were in Washtenaw County, where I live, that have been hospitalized for COVID are Black folks. And we make up 12 to 14% of the population, right? And so people are saying, well, it's our right to assemble. Okay, I hear you. And also, you're not wearing masks. You are armed. I mean, are y'all going to shoot the virus? What is the deal? I'm so confused, right? And so we have to really go back to the basics and really hear one another. And that's why I'm bringing diverse and marginalized voices. I guess that's one way of putting it, because even though Marlen is, I'm not saying that I know and love Marlen because he's part of family, right? And I am reluctant to humanize in the way that it feels good for others, to be like, oh, well, he's a husband, he's a father, he's an attorney, you know, to that those are the things that just add value to him. He's a human being, and that's enough. That
Absolutely.
is really the end of the story. So
Full stop.
he ought to not be violated, period. That's the end of it. His sons need to go out and be able to live their best life and come back home, period. Independent of any behavior that's what young people do. Sometimes we've all made mistakes. I mean, Marlen and I have both made mistakes when we were younger people, right? That cannot be the narrative. And so we sometimes go down the rabbit hole of like, well, what was he doing here? And what was she wearing? I mean, it's the same thing that we talk about when we're talking about sexual assault or intimate partner violence. Well, what did she say? It doesn't matter what she said.
Right.
No partner should be putting their hands in a harmful way, in a violent way to their partner, period. That's the end of that story. And I'm not going to entertain anymore, right? It doesn't matter what I was wearing. I could be walking around nude. I'm not going to, but I could be. And it would not give anyone the right to do anything that I haven't provided consent for, period, right? So all of these things, I mean, y'all who listen to me, you know that oftentimes I say, we have a racism problem in this country, in this institution, whatever the institution is, we've got it. And we have a connecting the dots problem. You know, we have got to do a better job of listening to one another. And I'm not going to entertain foolishness. Reverse racism doesn't exist. I'm not, you can miss me with that. Talk to somebody else. I'm sure they can listen to you. It won't be me. And it probably won't be Marlen, because we're not going to entertain that. That said, we will entertain conversation. We are open to conversation, provided there's not further harm being caused, you know? And so what Marlen has shared with us graciously, right? And then we'll shift our attention, because as we close up, I know that you have other things going on this evening, is harm was caused, you know? This is a man that's in his dominion, he's in his home, and he's wanting to enjoy that home, especially under current conditions. I mean, we're all feeling kind of cloistered right now. I mean, we really don't have that much room to roam. And we can talk about this another time, Marlen, of like how Black folks historically have not had room to roam, right? Yeah. Historically, our Blackness is the threat. Just our being, the skin that we're in, is the threat. We are always I feared for my life. If you are a police officer and you're always fearing for your life, you may want to check your calling. You might want to take a look at that, because if someone's walking away from you and you still are fearing for your life, and that's the reason you shoot someone who is walking away from you, I mean, we got a problem. So all of this to say, I have hope, some days more than others.
Yes, so true.
I have hope that if we want to, I'll put it that way, if we want to get better and heal the generational trauma of slavery, of racism, we can. And it will require those that live in the majority to sit and listen and be quiet and do your own work. So whatever that means to you, if you think I'm talking to you, I'm talking to you. To that end, I thought it was really funny that you really wanted to correct me, and I hear you, when you were like, not 270, 240. What? How do you self-care? How do you take care of your soul, Marlen? And kind of with all that you are shouldering.
I go on daily walks with the family. You know, I read. I try to meditation, not in the classic sense, but I try to have my alone time where I'm just alone with my thoughts. I try to really just kind of appreciate just all kind of the wonderment that's around me, you know, nature, and one of the blessings and disguised blessings of this COVID environment is really taking the time to just pay attention to the little things that oftentimes take so much for granted. Yeah. Just last week, my sons and I were walking back from the park, and my youngest son noticed a woodpecker that was up. And we stood there for minutes just watching in amazement and listening to the sounds. And so, you know, a lot of those things are good for me personally to escape, you know, the realities of, like I said, the current political environment and the toxic environment that we find ourselves in right now. And quite honestly, I don't think I'm alone in this, that, you know, if we sat and dwelled on this too much, we would lose our collective minds. I mean, there's so much in life as an adult to be worried about. And when you have to think about, you know, some of the other things that are specific and unique to people of color on top of that, that, you know, our counterparts or other people don't necessarily have to think about or be concerned with. It is enough to add undue stress on top of just regular life stresses. And so the self-care, and one of the things I'm looking forward to getting back to are the massages and massage therapy, which kind of coincides with my meditation. It allows me kind of the freedom to kind of relax mind and body, which is so needed in this environment.
I love that. And then my final question to you is, how do you feel you are perhaps, so you can pick one of the two, conscious and aligned, or what does living a conscious and aligned life mean to you?
Oh, that's such a loaded question.
I'm good at
You
this.
know, I was an African American studies major in college. Much to the chagrin of my father, I transferred out of the business school because I needed a sense of self and defining. You know, I actually had an incident in 8th grade that drove me to that in world history class, when our teacher went around on genealogy day and was asking all the students, you know, to tell about their families and family histories and genealogy, where they came from. And so when all the students went, when she got to me, before I could even utter a word, she said, "Oh, Marlon, I believe all the slaves came from Africa or West Africa." And, you know, I remember how it felt being paralyzed with fear and shame and just a sense of not knowing at that time. And I reconciled, resolved myself at that moment that I would never let anyone, and white people in particular, know more about me than I knew about myself. And so that started kind of my journey on through high school and college. Quite honestly, was really one of the catalysts to help me change my major. But in the course of that, you know, I read and studied a lot of WEB DuBois and the dual consciousness of Black people is one that isn't lost on me, and one that I really came to appreciate all the more as a professional, and particularly in the legal environment. You hear this a lot of times about code switching that Black people do and people of color do in certain environments in order to acclimate. A lot of times it's to disarm, you know, their Blackness or our Blackness, and disarm other people to make people feel more comfortable with us. And, you know, in a lot of ways, you know, I think back on a lot of the accommodations that I feel like I make in order to make other people feel comfortable. And it pains me to think that I sacrifice, and I'm not alone in this, but so much of myself in order to make other people feel comfortable with me, when in reality, the real me should be enough to make them feel comfortable.
That's right.
And so, you know, for me, that alignment really comes with helping people to know and understand, you know, the dichotomy of the world that people of color live in. You know, we don't have the luxury of retreating to communities where it can be only us, or working in jobs where it's only us, or going to schools where it's only us. We have to share our reality with others, where others can retreat, you know, unto themselves and not necessarily be, you know, be inclined or be made to share their realities with us. And so I hope to continue to use, you know, my platforms, whether it's my professional, whether it's social media, to really bring light and hopefully some understanding to this, that so that people really understand and appreciate the duality of the roles and the worlds that we live in and have to operate in. And to your point about communication and sharing and understanding, I mean, that's the only place it's going to come from. But I really think that in order for that to take place, people really have to take down those walls of resistance to others and otherness, and really open themselves up in their minds to allow the reality of a perspective unlike their own to kind of enter their minds, so that can influence their thoughts and hopefully influence their behavior.
Absolutely. Well, I'm so glad this was worth the wait. I like to get a commitment from guests on air while I'm recording so that folks are like, you said it on this day at this time. Yeah, I would definitely love to have you come back so that we can chat some more. You have really been, it's been awesome to finally get a chance to talk to you in this environment. I hear a little person that may need.
Oh yeah.
And I'm just so thrilled that you took the time out of your day and all what you
No,
have.
it was my honor and pleasure. Thank you so very much. I really appreciate it. And you've got my commitment now. The lawyer in me says it's entrapment, but I'll call it a commitment.
That is so great. I know it's so funny because I was just getting off the call right before we recorded, and I was with a friend who is also an attorney, and I was like, it's gonna be real Esquire-y, and we just started cracking up because I was like, you are gonna love Marlen, and just hearing his voice. And I know there are a lot of folks that are waiting for me to kind of get this up online so that they can listen to your wisdom and discernment and just your lived experience. So I'm so grateful that you agreed to chat and share more about who you are with folks that want to know and want to do their own work. So thank you. And y'all know what I'm going to say. Stay well, wash your damn hands, and may we take care of ourselves and one another. Thanks.
Absolutely. Welcome.